Welcome, my name is Sandro Galea. I serve as Dean of the WashU School of Public Health. Welcome to Public Health Ideas. These are conversations that aim to highlight work that advances the science of health. In particular, this is a series of conversations we are having about current changes to the policy landscape. The goal is to have non-partisan, science-based conversations, keep an open mind about potential policy change, even to welcome potential change for the better, but to be analytic about how proposed changes may affect the health of populations. I have the privilege today of speaking with Professor Dan Giammar, Walter Browne Professor of Environmental Engineering at the McKelvey School of Engineering, Director of the Center of the Environment at WashU, secondarily appointed to the School of Public Health, and co-director of our Innovation Research Network on Planetary Health. The goal is to talk briefly about the proposed changes that may affect the health of the environment, including but not limited to deregulation of environmental protections and withdrawal from global climate agreements. Dan, welcome. Let's start with some first principles. Let's start with environment, global environmental climate change, a topic that has been highly freighted and politicized. But talk us through the science quickly.
Sure. So if we think about climate change, the physical science of this is actually very, very well established. And the physical science is that the atmosphere helps keep the sun's warmth near the surface of the Earth. In fact, if we didn't have an atmosphere, it would be a lot colder on this planet and large portions would be uninhabitable. So we need to have an atmosphere that keeps some of that warmth near the Earth's surface. And that's caused by greenhouse gases. Water is actually the most important of them, but carbon dioxide is incredibly important, and there are others as well. And what has happened since the Industrial Revolution is that we have changed the composition of the atmosphere. Concentrations of carbon dioxide have gone up from 280 part per million to now consistently over 400. So that's a very substantial increase, and that just means we are trapping more of the sun's energy near the Earth's surface. And that carbon dioxide change since the Industrial Revolution is principally from burning fossil fuels for industry, for electricity. It also has to do with cement and cement production and land use change, but principle is fossil fuel burning.
So that's a wonderful, succinct, and very clear description, and you certainly convinced me that we know the physical science. So how is that now intersecting with policy and regulation, and how does that intersect with sort of partisan conflagrations we're seeing now around the issue?
Sure. I'll speak a little bit to the policy. And first off, you're talking to an environmental engineer who follows this very much, but is not himself a policy expert. I've followed this for quite a while. It is an incredibly tricky challenge. It is a classic tragedy of the commons issue, that we all are harmed by excess carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, but what any one of us, including any one country, does on its own won't make a difference, because our carbon dioxide emissions go across the entire planet. China's carbon dioxide emissions go across the entire planet. Say the same for the other big emitters, Russia, India, the EU, Japan. All of them are contributing to this. And so in order to solve this problem, we actually need to have international agreements. And those are not going to be easy for us to do. The Paris Agreement had us on the right path, where countries would set some targets and need some accountability to hold to those. There was a real look to the leadership of the United States and China as the two largest emitters to say, here's what their targets would be and how they would try to get to those. Backing away from those has simply said, it's a little bit of a Wild West, if you will, that we can continue to put our carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, knowing it will harm us, but it will harm everybody else on the planet as well.
So I think that was terrific. And I feel like any discussion we're having about the environment, environmental health, has to start with climate. That's fine. So we've done that. Now let's zoom in a little bit. So you and I are recording this in June of 25, more than 100 days into the new administration. And there has been certainly a lot of noise, some practical change, but a lot of noise around potential changes to environmental regulatory landscape. So what are you seeing? What do you worry about? And what, if anything, do you think might be opening up new ideas and steps in the right direction?
Sure. It's an important question, and I agree with you. It's important for us to have an open mind about all of this. Right now, the rollback of regulations, I would say a huge word for everything right now, remains uncertainty. Right. We know that there are some regulations that are going to be rolled back. We're not sure to where. We're not sure when. So there's a lot of uncertainty on that. And regulatory uncertainty, whenever I talk to my colleagues in industry and in practice, they don't like uncertainty. They're actually, many of them are not anti-regulation, they're anti-uncertainty, because how do they make an investment decision for 10 years or longer down the road without knowing what the regulatory framework will be? So uncertainty overall is a real challenge. For environmental regulations, the biggest ones that we're seeing right now are those that intersect with energy. So there's this huge connection between how we produce our energy and environmental impacts. So the biggest things that we've seen proposed for a rollback or deregulation are those environmental regulations related to energy use, carbon dioxide, but others, when we burn a lot of our fossil fuels, there are water quality and air quality impacts. The single largest source of mercury, a well-known toxin to the environment, is coal combustion. And so changing regulations on mercury are going to allow us to have that energy dominance by burning more coal, which actually right now only makes up 15% of our electricity in the US. So allow more mercury emissions so that we could have burn more coal, but it is going to increase the amount of mercury in the environment. To your point, other things that concern me, I'm concerned about regulations, but I'm also concerned about the overall disinvestment in our research infrastructure. As somebody at a university, of course, I'm concerned about grant funding, but I'm also thinking right now about the Environmental Protection Agency's Office of Research and Development. 1,500 career scientists, nonpartisan, who provided the scientific basis, not just for regulations, but what are the technologies of the future? How do we respond to a crisis? A good colleague of mine worked there for several decades, was an expert on lead in drinking water. The Flint water crisis happened. EPA would have been completely caught with their pants down if they didn't have these experts in Office of Research and Development who were there providing scientific advice to help solve that crisis. He now works in private industry. He saw the writing on the wall, thought after a career with ORD, it was going to be the right time to make a move someplace else. And it's really our loss as a country.
So that takes us now to your own particular area of research, which is drinking water quality. Guide us through, using perhaps drinking water quality as an example. Can you guide us through what changes are being discussed that might be implemented and what impact it's actually going to have on our drinking water?
Sure. I'll give you 3 examples on that. The first one will be selenium, which is actually not a huge issue for our drinking water, but it is a contaminant that has a big impact on waterfowl. It bioaccumulates in the environment, and it can have devastating impacts on ecosystems. One of the biggest sources of selenium to the environment is the wastewater from coal-fired power plants. There was a decade-long process that set the effluent limitation guidelines for these facilities. If that changes, we're going to see more selenium in the environment, and the impacts on ecosystems are going to get worse. Coming to drinking water, I'll give you one example. You've probably heard about forever chemicals, per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, PFAS. We have known for decades that these are bad for our health. Finally, in 2024, we got the first drinking water regulation for PFAS chemicals. This has been coming for a long time. We're going to regulate 6 of those. There's going to be a compliance that needed to come into effect in a few years. But one of the things we've seen over just the last month, that rule is going to be revisited. Instead of regulating 6, we're going to regulate 2. Now we're going to have to comply with these rules by 2031. And so it's a delayed implementation on things that we have known for decades are bad for our health. We were ready to do the right thing. The technologies are out there. It would cost money to comply with this, but it would protect human health. And it's just going to take longer. And the last one, which is a little bit of a different angle on this, lead in drinking water, which is something that I study. We have had a revision to the regulatory framework for that, and it actually looks like those regulations may be safe. The lead and copper rule revisions, lead and copper rule improvements. But the best thing we can do about lead in our drinking water is get the lead pipes removed. And that's very expensive. In the Infrastructure and Jobs Act, we're $9 billion that were going to be available for lead pipe replacements. It was going to help us across the country, regardless of economic status, solve this problem by accelerating the removal of those lead pipes. If we see something like those funds that were allocated through the Infrastructure and Jobs Act not being there, this is going to slow down our ability to meet the obligations of that rule.
Let me tie in 2 strands of what you were saying. You mentioned earlier the threat to research. You're talking about both academic research, but also intramural within federal funding agencies. So you and I sit in a university, and you are a key player in the Center for the Environment, in our Innovation Research Network and Planetary Health. Talk us through, I'm talking less about the particular of what we're doing, but about the role of universities, the academic space in building a consensus that it's actually good for us to have a healthy environment, safe air to breathe, water to drink. What role do universities play in all this?
Sure. I mean, universities play a huge role in this. And I would start with the generation of new scientific knowledge, especially for emerging contaminants like PFAS and other chemicals, agricultural chemicals that some of my colleagues study. We don't actually have the scientific answers to understand what's the occurrence of these. How do we best analyze them? What are their health effects? What are technologies that we can use to remove them? Ultimately, the deployment of that will be done by private industry, often regulatory driven, but there are many unresolved science questions that here that we sit, trying to generate new knowledge through the scientific method. There are a great need for that type of work in society.
Let's try to be positive for a second, because why not? So it is, I think there's an argument to be made that new technologies are coming online that actually may perhaps leapfrog some of the challenges that we're having. Things like greater reliance on nuclear energy, things like AI in some as yet undescribed role playing a positive role here. So are there such ideas that are floating around that you see that might be coming from an injection of creativity and disruption at the moment that actually might be shaking up how we used to think about things, that might lead us to a good place perhaps faster than we might have with a different way of thinking?
Sure. I love that question, Sandro. I'm an engineer. At heart, I really do think that technology can be put to serve society.
It's a positive use.
Technology can protect the environment. Technology can allow us to have energy services without climate change. We don't want to get rid of energy services. We want the quality of life that is enabled by affordable, dispatchable, on-demand electricity. And I think technology has a huge role to play there. You mentioned nuclear. I like the idea of nuclear. I'm definitely on board with an all of the above approach to how we provide energy. We need reliable, at scale, dispatchable. Nuclear is available technology that we can do at scale with no direct carbon dioxide emissions. Now, that said, nuclear is a long process. It takes a decade to permit a plant. Even if regulations were simpler, it would still take a long time. It's going to take decades to build these. It's not the type of technology that we're going to put into place by flipping a switch. If we really wanted to be serious about increasing nuclear in this country, it can't be one administration's move. It needs to be bipartisan, congressional, across administration support that, yes, the United States is going to be serious about nuclear, not for 3 years, but 30 years.
For decades, yeah.
On the technology side, the thing I'm actually more excited about is energy storage. We think about renewables, solar and wind. Right now, in the last year, we actually generated more electricity from solar and wind than we did for coal. I think that's the first time in the United States that has happened. The always Achilles heel of solar and wind has been they're intermittent. You want electricity when you want it, not just when the sun is shining or the wind is blowing. And our ability to store energy with improved battery technologies can play a huge role in using renewables for a reliable on-demand source of power. 10 years ago, you'd be hard-pressed to find a car that you could drive 300 miles on a charge. You can now buy them from multiple companies. Right. Yeah. So that type of advance, I would say, in energy storage is what has me perhaps most excited about current technologies.
Well, I think it's a perfect segue into the last question, hope. Let's talk about hope. It's a time of churn, domestically, globally. From your vantage point, from where you're sitting, what gives you most hope?
Sure. It's people and institutions. On the people side, there is not a diminished interest in environmental sustainability and environmental research. If anything, there's as much interest in this that I've seen from our students and our faculty in my entire career. We have students from across the world coming to WashU who want to study something in an environmental field, environmental science, environmental policy, environmental engineering. These are some of the brightest students out there. And if we can train them right, they're going to be the ones who are going to also help us solve these problems. Among my colleagues, we often talk about, sitting in silos. Nobody at WashU wants to sit in a silo. There's a huge appetite for getting out of our silos and working collaboratively. And environmental research is one of the best places to do that. And then finally, at the institutional level, Washington University creating a School of Public Health and a Center for the Environment at essentially the same time, that is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. And so I'm really excited that our institution has made this investment in public health and environmental research. I think it's going to be tremendously important for our university, our country, and humanity.
Dan, thank you for talking. Thank you for everything you're doing.
Thank you, Sandro.